I think NATO continues to hold an extremely important role in not just the North Atlantic, but in the world as a group of countries who come together to share values, that share a commitment to shared security. And quite frankly, the fact that Canada has been able to show significant leadership, both in Baghdad leading the training mission in Iraq and on the eastern front of NATO in Latvia, as examples of where NATO still very much has an important role to play.
That was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reacting today to some strong comments from French President Emmanuel Macron. In an interview with The Economist, Macron said NATO was experiencing, quote, brain death. That's because, he says, the United States, a key member of the military alliance, can no longer be relied on to defend NATO allies. Both the U.S. Secretary of State and leader of Germany rejected Macron's assessment. So is NATO on its deathbed? Olivier Bell previously worked for the French Minister of Defense. He's now a visiting fellow at the Atlantic Council and joins us from Washington. Hi, Mr. Bell. Nice to see you. Thanks for your time today.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
So what is your sense of what Mr. Macron said? He said NATO is in the throes of, quote, brain death, and that European countries can no longer rely on the U.S. to defend its allies. How do you interpret that?
Well, I guess the first thing I would like to say is, and to borrow a phrase from here in DC, read the transcript. I mean, it's quite a dense interview. There's a lot to unpack in there. And he never wished NATO were brain dead. Mm-hmm. And when he says, I don't know about Article 5, this is not this is a descriptive comment, not a prescriptive comment. And what he's pointing at is the fact that there are strategic uncertainties in the alliance that many recognize and that we actually need to address now. And that is, I think, something we have been discussing for a while and that now we need to broach at a political level. And I think going into the leaders' meeting in London in December will be a good time to think about the future of the alliance. The second thing I think we should look at in that interview is that it's first an interview about Europe. It's quite lengthy, and there you can see someone who is concerned about the future of Europe and how it is going to stand on the world stage. And to a large extent, he is advocating for a more geopolitical Europe. Europe, and to use a phrase that's often banned in Paris, if it's not at the table, then it will be on the menu. And his concern is to make sure that Europe is at the table there. And he's very much trying to get the Europeans to be more active, to be more engaged, to be more responsible in terms of providing security and taking a geopolitical role on the world stage.
So do you think, I guess, how significant do you think the comments are in the context of that? Like, do you think they're motivated, I guess, by that desire to see that kind of evolution within Europe?
Yes. I mean, if you look at the Macron presidency, he has consistently called for Europeans to do more, to be more engaged. There was, if you remember, that call for a European intervention initiative. There was the debate about a European army. He called for a better use of Article 42.7, the solidarity clause of the European treaties. This is a constant concern of the Macron presidency. And I would argue this is also something that is being increasingly shared at the European level. If you look at von der Leyen, the next Commission president, she has openly advocated for a more geopolitical Commission. And there are common concerns that are being increasingly shared by the Europeans there.
So is that would that operate though, or those ideas, do they flourish within the context of NATO, or is Mr. Macron sort of pushing the conversation to determine whether or not that's the case?
Well, I think he's saying several things. I mean, he's saying, if you look at the interview, and he's recognizing it, that NATO is a formidable military machine, and he acknowledges that. What he's saying is that there is a political issue at the head of NATO, and in that context, I mean, the metaphor of being brain dead is actually quite appropriate. The issue is with the political layer of NATO. But there are also elements, if we want Europe to be a geopolitical power on the world stage, part of that power is going to come through non-military means. And he actually tackled that in the interview. There is a long section about technology, about trade, about how we need to think about those things as also part of, through a geopolitical lens, and not solely through an economic lens, as we have been prone to do in the European Union in the past.
Yeah, I totally take your point about the wider context of the interview and that it does go into a number of areas. But I guess, can you understand how even the comments that he made where NATO is concerned, given his role, would have the impact that they are having today?
Well, arguably, what he's trying to do is create a discussion, and I'd say that he has very much succeeded in doing so.
True, very true, yes.
There is, I think there is maybe a growing frustration about the fact that France has been trying to push that conversation for the past years, and now is the time to be having it.
Do you think it's also instigated by a conversation that has been happening not just in France but elsewhere about some of the actions taken unilaterally by the United States, about the situation that we see ourselves presented with, for example, with Syria and Turkey, and that sort of the conversation is pushed to a different level because of those actions as well? I mean, Mr. Macron highlighted some of that in his interview, but others have too.
Yes. I mean, what's happening in Turkey with a NATO member, with another NATO member, the United States, tackling these issues without a significant European voice is clearly part of the reasons why Macron thinks that we need to have a discussion about NATO in a more political sense, in a more strategic sense. But this is a conversation that's healthy. We need to be thinking about what is NATO for and what are we doing with NATO. France it doesn't mean that France is rejecting NATO. France is actively committed in NATO. France is deployed, for example, in Estonia, in NATO's enhanced forward presence. The debate isn't there. It's a political debate that Macron is trying to foster.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Bell. I appreciate your time today. That's Olivier Bell, a visiting fellow at the Atlantic Council. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.